Wisconsin has its chocolate chips and potato chips, and then there are the cow chips. Cow chips are the waste products of a cow's herbivorous diet. Cow drippings. Wisconsin is the dairy state, so it's no surprise that there are a lot of cows around. At the Wisconsin Cow Chip Throw in Prairie du Sac, cow chips are front and center. There are a lot of activities to please the family at this festival, but the cow throwing contest is the highlight. Whatever gave them that idea? For the early settlers of Wisconsin, winters were cold and lonely. When trees were scarce or too big to cut down, the pioneers looked for alternate heating fuel sources. They discovered that cow chips, chock full of grasses and minerals, could be used for this purpose. After the chips dried, they were odorless and they burned with intense heat and left no sooty residue. They were so valuable to the settlers that they were even used to trade for food and other necessities. Wisconsinites don't use cow chips to heat their homes these days, but each year thousands of people gather to celebrate them. There's plenty to do if you're not into chucking chips. Just look for the Trojan cow. It's 20 feet tall and kids can climb inside it. There's also live music, good food, races, and a parade. But let's get to the main event. Contestants select their chips from the Meadow Muffin Wagon. The best ones are about 6 feet inches around and fairly dense. Chips are usually tossed like a flying disc, and each competitor gets 2 throws. The winner is simply the competitor with the longest throw. There are 2 things to remember when competing. First, contestants can't wear gloves. Second, if they're brave enough, they can lick their fingers for a better grip. No Man's Land. Imagine a ball player who in one season reaches base 215 times, attempts 203 stolen bases, and is caught only twice. There was such a ball player, and her name was Sophie Curries. She was a star player in the All-American Girls Baseball League, AAGBL, of the 1940s and 50s. Curries' 201 steals in 1946, a year that the base paths were actually lengthened, were 6 times more than Brooklyn Dodger Pete Reiser's major league high of 34 that year, and Pistol Pete didn't have to slide with bare legs. Sliding was excruciating while wearing the uniform's short skirts, especially in Fort Wayne, where the grounds crew burned the infield with gasoline to dry it on rainy days. But the players all slid and never head first. It was a running league, and the constant sliding caused steep cuts known to ball players as strawberries that would painfully stick to clothes after games. I had strawberries on strawberries, Curries recalled. Curry stole 1,114 bases in just 8 seasons, most of them as a Racine Bell, and her 140 steal annual average was higher than Major League record holder Rickey Henderson's best season. Curry's most memorable moment, though, was beating the throw home for the only run of a 14-inning game to win the 1946 league championship. Max Carey, president of the AAGBL and the all-time National League stolen base leader back then with 738, called it the best game I've ever seen. The league was started in 1943. Most able-bodied men were serving in the armed forces, and the major leagues, not to mention the minors, were forced to use many players who would have been left out of the ballpark before World War II started. The AAGBL wasn't just a wartime phenomenon, though the league lasted until 1954, making several attempts to branch out. A 1949 tour of Central America featured exhibition games in 4 different countries. There were also junior teams, most notably the Junior Bells in Racine, where teenage girls learned from fundamentals, participated in a short season schedule, and occasionally played before the start of AAGBL contests. The league had some outstanding players. Two-time batting leader Dorothy Kamenchik, .292 lifetime, was sought by a men's minor league team in Fort Lauderdale, but she turned them down. Joanne Weaver, at 14, followed her sister Betty into the league and later became the only .400 hitter in AAGBL history. Bonnie Baker, a Saskatchewan-born catcher and former model, was the only player ever hired as a manager in the league. Pitcher Jean Fott, whose husband would eventually be her manager, had a baby in March 1948 and then went out and won 16 games on the season while also playing third base. She later pitched 2 perfect games and led South Bend to consecutive championships. Rose Yasiach once had 31 outfield assists in a season and converted to pitcher, helping the Rockford Peaches win 4 titles. Dottie Schroeder was the only woman to play every season and nearly every game of the league's existence, winning her only title in 12 seasons by driving in the winning run for the Kalamazoo Lassies in the last game in league history. The managers were better known as ex-Cub Woody English, former Pirate Carson Bigby, Bill Wambsgans, who was noted for turning an unassisted triple play in the 1920 World Series, and future Hall of Famers Kerry, Dave, Beauty Bancroft, and Jimmy Fox. Heavy drinking Fox, who retired from the majors in 1945 at second place on the all-time home run list, managed the Fort Wayne Daisies and was reportedly the inspiration for the character Jamie Dugan, played by Tom Hanks in the 1992 film A League of Their Own. Hollywood likes to stretch the truth, but A League of Their Own wasn't too far off base. If anything, the movie condensed the 12 seasons of the league's existence into 1 year and pieced many real-life stories together to create characters with fictional names. The most memorable aspects of the film are mostly true. The Midwestern locale, the mass tryout in Chicago, the compulsory charm school, the chaperones, the bus trips, the camaraderie, a player's child in uniform on the bench, and the candy magnate who started the whole thing, the fictional Walter Harvey, proprietor of Harvey Field, as opposed to Chicago Cubs owner Philip Wrigley. A brief 1993 television series with the same name as the film could have shed more light on other facets of the league, but its 6-episode run was shorter than some homestands. Contrary to what was depicted in the movie, though, the league began with a 12-inch softball thrown underhand from 40 feet away. The ball got smaller, the mound got farther away, and the distance between the bases grew as the league wore on. By 1954, the ball was 9.5 inches, or the same size as the regulation Major League ball. The mound was 60 feet from home plate, and the bases were 85 feet apart. But all these changes weren't enough to keep the league from folding. Mismanagement by independent owners, too much expansion, and dwindling attendance eventually killed off the AAGBL. In its last year, the players drove their own cars to games when teams could no longer afford a bus, and they even played without pay toward the end. The ride had been a good one, though. The $45 to $75 average weekly salary was far more than most women would have earned in occupations they enjoyed for far less. What's more, the 600 women who made the grade earned the right to play baseball professionally. That's something only a handful of women have been able to claim in the half-century since then. When bicycles ruled the sporting world, what sport lasted a day longer than the ancient Olympics, broke the race barrier before baseball, and caused more injuries than modern football? Turn of the century bicycle racing, of course. Blood, guts, and determination. In 1900, the most popular sport in North America was a grueling 6-day bicycle race, usually held at indoor velodromes with wooden tracks. Teams of 2 riders would compete for 144 hours, take turns accruing laps and competing in sprinting events. This was not for the faint of heart. As many as 70,000 fans watched these powerful riders push themselves to the limits of endurance, often sustaining serious, even fatal injuries in the process. Here are some of the sport's major players. Reggie McNamara, 1887 to 1970. Dubbed the Iron Man of cycling, Australian Reggie McNamara had a seemingly inhuman capacity for the punishment and exertion that defined the 6-day event. On the 4th day of a competition in Melbourne, McNamara underwent an emergency trackside operation without anesthesia to remove a large abscess from his side. Though he lost a considerable amount of blood, he rose from the dust and, ignoring the advice of his doctor, resumed the race. In fact, injuries put him in the hospital so often that he wound up marrying an American nurse after a 1913 race in New York. He set several world records and beat the French so badly that they refused to ride against him. Bobby Waltow, 1878 to 1949. Oh, it gets really dark here. Let's see. Okay. During his career, bicycling champion Bobby Waltow of Atlanta, Georgia, suffered nearly 50 collarbone fractures and was twice assumed to be dead on the track, only to rise and continue riding. By the time he was 18, he was the undisputed champion of the South. Soon after, he was international champion, a title he kept for several years. In addition to making cycling familiar to people all over the world, Waltow brought a great deal of prominence to his native Atlanta. Invigorated by his accomplishments, Atlanta built the Coliseum, one of the world's preeminent velodromes at the time. Okay. Marshall Major Taylor, 1879 to 1932. African-American cyclist Major Taylor proved that endurance cycling was a sport in which individual talent could not be denied. In an era of overt racism, he rose through the ranks to become one of the highest paid athletes of his time. After moving from Indiana to Massachusetts, Taylor began to rack up victories in the 6-day and sprinting competitions. Taylor toured the world, defeated Europe's best riders, and set several world records during his professional career. Enter the machines. Like modern rock star racing, 6-day cycling events used pacing vehicles. Originally, these were bicycles powered by 2 to 5 riders. But in 1895, English races began using primitive motorcycles. These new pace vehicles allowed the cyclists to travel faster, owing to the aerodynamic draft produced by the machines. Crowds thrilled to the speed and noise of these mechanical monsters, which weighed about 300 pounds each. It took 2 men to operate the motorcycles, one to steer and one to control the engine. They were also quite dangerous. A tandem pacer forced off the track in Waltham, Massachusetts, on May 30th, 1900, killed both riders and injured several fans. The advent of motorcycles increased the popularity of the 6-day races for a time, but it waned with the arrival of a new vehicle that spectators preferred over bicycles: the automobile.